Hello, good creatures, and welcome. Today, you're going to hear us talk about the book, The Science of Enlightenment by Shinzen Young.
And me and Petrina just had a whole conversation about enlightenment, meditation, mindfulness, what is a good and effective framework to put in a good mindfulness or meditation practice. We talked about the philosophy of oneness, impermanence, and stay tuned, where I like Shinzen's perspective on what would be Eastern understanding and Western understanding, and the way he put them together, I think was his sort of superpower. What is his gift in a lot of ways? And so he starts with this quote where he says, meditation is the systematic exploration of nature from the inside out, and science as the systematic exploration of nature from the outside in. And I think for me, this is something that parallels my belief on exercise. It's a juxtaposition, the parallel of what is the applied experience from training, and then what is the research takeaways from a given methodology around training. What is the science perspective on progressive overload, and then say what is the practical application of progressive overload. But then you apply progressive overload to somebody, and then what is the experience of that progressive overload? And if you, the person applying the progressive overload, had never experienced what it was to go through progressive overload, you would lack a certain understanding. And what I thought about this being so revolutionary, but then also very in line with my thinking, is it's a very open-minded look on what would be on a face value two opposite perspectives. And I think him going over what was the gift that Eastern understanding gave us, and then what was the gift that Western understanding gave us, as in sort of Western science, and then Eastern meditation, mindfulness, other practices, was the foundation of what really stuck out was a superpower of this book and Shinzen Young. Do you have any parallels with that quote? Did you have anything that stick, like when you read the book, did you note that, or was that something that kind of just went over with you?
Well, it's interesting because that quote comes from the start of the book, and I didn't clock it at the time. I've read this book multiple times, and I've not really clocked it before until you pointed it out to me. But as soon as you pointed it out, separate from the book, I was like, oh, that really means something to me. I think I get where you're coming at it from in terms of the difference between knowing something and experiencing something. And I think that that's a point that he really makes in this, which is that, like, all throughout it, as he's talking about meditation, what you can learn through that experience, what are some of the experiences you might have while practicing meditation, he says all through it, but don't take my word for it. Go practice yourself and see for yourself, find out for yourself. He wants that experiential component to be there. Which is cool. The other piece of it, though, the other piece of this quote for me is that I really like that he has explored meditation and explored that the phenomena that people can experience during meditative practices, especially long-term dedicated practices, he has really approached describing it the way a scientist would describe any other experimental phenomena, right? Really describing what are the characteristics and how do we measure those things, and what are like common phenomena that arise through the natural world that we observe. Like, he really does take a scientist's lens to meditation. And he does a really wonderful job of weaving both his academic knowledge, the spiritual traditions across cultures into that experience. But he really does, the foundation of it is about the scientific approach to meditation and enlightenment, which that characterizes the whole book. And it's part of why I love this particular book. I think it makes what can be for some people a spiritual practice, it makes it more perhaps accessible for people who consider themselves to be atheistic or agnostic, and so might shy away from some of these spiritual traditions, because he presents it in a way that it is very scientific. And so for those who, like I said, are more atheistic and more scientifically minded, this is a practice that's for everybody. It's not kind of out in the realm of like woo-woo and or just for like gurus and shaman, right? It's for
Yeah.
everybody.
Yeah, I think it's interesting because there's like that parallel to it. There's also what would be somebody who's so ingrained in that spiritual process or that task that sometimes they get so bottled into their given sort of experience on it that then they lack what would be the power of understanding commonalities in other experiences or frameworks. And I
Yeah.
think for me, it's actually one of the biggest things for me in what is my superpowers of exercise is that academic education, is that I went through that academic side, but also went through the practical side. I was obsessed with training, and I was doing academia because I was obsessed with training. And I think for me, it's funny because it parallels what I believe is my superpower, or like when I've always described this to people is like, you can have somebody who does the thing and can get pretty good at the thing. When they try to teach others the thing, it's framed in their experience, which can sometimes be limiting factors. If you have somebody who studies the thing and just studies the thing, they can get really good at understanding the broad theme and the specific micro details of the thing. And then they can actually get pretty good at certain things depending on how many different people they take through that given framework or whatever it is with the thing that they're doing. And then so what I really like about this is when you have these far ends, you never get the anomalies. The anomalies of the teachers or the coaches or the leaders are the people that have these two frameworks and you smash them together. If you can have a really in-depth academic understanding of deep principles and commonalities between a whole, what is in now our world, everything from the beginning of modern time, which is kind of a crazy superpower, but then you can grind it into the applied learnings from something, you get a truly unique individual. And I think with this book, one of the things that stood out to me is like, ooh, this is a truly unique individual. And it plays
Yeah.
out to me is in the book, one of the biggest parts is sort of drawing out his story from the academia. And one of the biggest points for me is when he lands and he starts the sort of ordainship journey. And he goes into with the monk, and basically the monk tells him that, maybe this could happen, but you're going to have to do this. And you're only going to get this far if you're worthy. And so he actually has to do the thing. And one of my favorite stories from it is him talking about the 100 days in isolation and his previously described sort of like academic baby self that, and the transformation he had to go through that practice, I think is the key takeaways for me of where Shinzen was a truly unique individual. And it created the biggest foundation of where I was going to be really excited what came next. Because it was funny, the second round through, I noted that quote down. The first round through, it jumped out at me. I said, ooh, we're in for a ride. Because it's like the way he said this tells me he doesn't have the limiting beliefs I see in a lot of other things that I've done learning on, is that this is the one way. And it's like he's already described what on face value kind of looks like a yin and yang, but is actually two parts of a puzzle. And then that's what brings in the yin and yang principle to the beginning. But it's like a lot of people, it's like the very definition of what an ideology would be. It's like there could be a yin and yang, but we don't want to listen to the yang. It's like we don't want anything to do with that. And that's actually contradicting the way we see the world. So we don't want to view that, but then inherently gives you a limited perspective on a task.
Yeah.
So this quote really stood out to me as now it's funny, I'm talking about it quite a bit now.
Yeah.
So like it was quite big. Yeah.
I think you introduced this idea of like there being like yin and yang to things, and the idea that sometimes we reject parts of experience. And I know that's something we are definitely going to talk about more, because it was one of the big themes that came out of the book. But I don't want to jump ahead, because I think there are some things that we need to kind of orient our listeners to, just some really simple things that are from the book. So for anybody who hasn't read the book, what are some of the essential concepts that Shinzen builds from? Because I think if we just introduce those to our listeners, we can then talk about all of the things that we learned and applied from this book, and they'll be able to come along on this journey with us. So the first set of concepts, I'll introduce them, and I'll let you kind of jump into our beginnings of explaining them, Nate. He talks about that meditation is a full sensory experience that has 3 characteristics, and those characteristics are concentration, clarity, and equanimity. And each of those characteristics are separate skill sets that we can develop through the practice of meditation. So concentration, clarity, and equanimity. What did you make of that? What did you take from him kind of setting that as the foundation for what meditation is?
Yeah, I think for me, there was a long history of some of what is meditation and mindfulness as 2 separate entities in my understanding. Mindfulness came up in my psychology courses the deeper I got, is specifically in my advanced sports psych courses. Mindfulness came up as this topic, and I got introduced to like a body scan and certain ways to be observant of internal experience. And but meditation had somehow been on this totally opposite continuum, which is something that came up in other learnings of mine, that all the benefits of meditation. And what stuck out to me was this idea of being able to drop into deeper brain frequencies in the day seemed a bit of like a superpower to me. Like, it's like, okay, all right, so you're telling me I need maybe like an hour of REM sleep. 2 hours of REM sleep is pretty good, but I only need an hour of REM sleep out of an 8-hour sleep, and I'm doing pretty good. 2 hours of REM sleep, like, we're doing really good. So what if I could sit there and pop into a REM sleep-like state for 30 minutes at one point in the day? That seems like a superpower to me. And then, so it had existed on almost 2 continuums. The quote he used that stuck out to me was, I like to describe mindfulness as a 3-fold attentional skill set with concentration, power, sensory clarity, and equanimity. That all of a sudden, it sort of created that, okay, maybe meditation is a practice and mindfulness is a broader concept in what he's describing. And that for me kind of really, through my analytical parts of my brain and how I seek understanding, that created a better understanding for me than anything else. And then so there's so many things here that stick out to me with those 3 concepts, because then now it became a skill set that I could improve on with, say, concentration, power, sensory clarity, and equanimity. With now, it's almost like there's a game to be improved on. And with me and my brain, that's the biggest thing. But then it's like, now it became, you could talk about the benefits of what training is. Without the proper training plan and the proper behavior executed, you don't get the benefits. So It's like all this thing of meditation and mindfulness and all these benefits I had been heard. Now, all of a sudden, this understanding of what the training plan is, like what are the broader concepts, was really effective to me.
Yes.
Which then started off on my understanding, or what actually kicked off a better mindfulness practice or meditation practice than I'd ever had. But for me, it started in my head injury times, where now I've been dealing with roughly about 2 years of sort of continuous head related injuries, or post-concussion syndrome stuff. And I had heard a lot of benefits about meditation before, and then now, okay, all right, I got these brain injuries that are causing me problems, and I've heard maybe I could pop into REM sleep throughout the middle of the day. This looks like a good thing to start on. And then that started in my meditation experience as a way to heal. And what it then has played over time is much deeper than just healing, which is now I'm getting all the qualities of what this skill set you could attain through.
Yeah.
On the opening, I was going to say, on the opening topic, is there anything that sticks out for you?
Yeah, I think before we kind of move into some of our personal experiences, I want to just kind of clarify what each of those things are, because I love your analogy of saying that this is kind of like the different components of a training plan, where a training plan might have components that focus on strength versus power versus mobility. Those are different skill sets, different components that might go into a training plan. That is kind of the same thing that we've got with concentration, clarity, and equanimity. And so just describe those a little bit for our audience. So concentration is often what I am talking about when I talk about mindfulness practices. As I've shared before on the podcast, I do a type of therapy that has core mindfulness skills as one of the central foundations for the therapy that I do. And it is about having control of your attention, having control over where your attention goes, and about how that's a skill set that is really lacking in our society right now, because we have so many things that are distracting us and are vying for our attention, and that it is a skill set that we have to intentionally develop over time through effort. And so that's one of the things through practicing mindfulness we develop, is the ability to focus our attention where we want it to go and to not be distracted by other things. Clarity then is getting to a place where you can, where you're focusing your attention, then you can get clarity on what is it that I am paying attention to? What am I noticing while I have turned my attention toward either inward toward internal phenomena or outward towards something else? What is it that I am noticing? And getting really precise with what am I observing, what am I describing, and getting to a place where you can do so from a dispassionate kind of stance, that you can step away from it, that you're not judging, you're not evaluating, you are just noticing and describing. And that is then what enables us to move into the third skill set, which is equanimity, which is that we can get to a place where we can detach from our internal thoughts, our internal emotional sensory experiences, and not judge them as good or bad, desirable or undesirable, positive or negative. Instead, they are all simply phenomena that are all valid and can be experienced with the same level of acceptance as anything else. There's no such thing as one experience that would have more value than another from a mindfulness and full sensory experience point of view. So that's kind of concentration, clarity, and equanimity. I think that I really like that way of breaking it down, because I think, as you said, I have a tendency to fall more into that psychology camp of describing things as mindfulness. The reason for that is because I think that there's a lot of stigma or preconceived notions that people have as soon as you introduce the word meditation to something, there's all of this kind of cultural weight that people apply to that word, or, like I said, preconceived ideas that people might have depending on what their own history with that word may have been and other things they have practiced. So I tend to go with mindfulness just because it is more neutral. And when I talk about mindfulness, it really is more it includes all three of the skills, but it really is heavily focused on the concentration piece, simply because without the concentration piece, you're going to have a really hard time getting to the clarity and equanimity pieces. And so I spend a lot of time focusing on helping people develop that concentration capacity. But that's only one piece of a full meditative experience. And there's some semantic things around that. Anyway.
I think
ahead.
for the... it's interesting because it's almost like through my past experience, mindfulness definitely was the psychology background in relation to some of my academic understanding. And then meditation was only something that was sort of coming up to me by secondary noting, I think, to some of my educational resources that existed outside of education. What would be Ben with Muscle Intelligence was one of them, and say that was one of the first things that meditation came up. So I like that breakdown of things, as mindfulness being the sort of almost like the psychological background of things, and mindfulness being this bigger concept of what is then a whole bunch of other different tools and breakdowns of things. And I think that's why his breakdown of concentration, power, sensory clarity, and equanimity really stands out, because I think it's digestible. It's easy to just see how being able to concentrate better is valuable, especially in a society where they're trying to turn us into goldfish, and the slot machine like psychology principles being put into a whole bunch of different areas in our life. But concentration power, it's easy to argue how that would be valuable to have. Like, it's just like if you were talking about it's good to be stronger, like it's like that's a pretty general understanding thing. And then with concentration power, makes sense. Sensory clarity, being able to understand one's internal experience, easy to argue how that would be a valuable thing. And then equanimity, I think, then starts to get a little bit further. You have to almost find you have to find yourself to equanimity. Like, equanimity doesn't jump out in front of you, depending on what background you're from. It's something you kind of have to find. What I really liked about this concept, if we then move for you, if we move into what is some of the concentration and what we're trying to concentrate on, there was a couple concepts that really stood out to me. I think sort of an introducing thing, he brought up this quote that stood out to me, and it was that meditation can become something to help you transcend yourself, where if you're often identifying with your thoughts and your feelings, or you're identifying with your mind and your body, you then can find your place in a prison. And that, now that'll go into other things we're going to move into, but I think just this is a concept that if I'm angry, all I am is angry, versus if I'm experiencing anger, I exist something outside my anger, and then I can pay attention to what anger is. And then I really liked his concept that he built onto this, that this type of general experience for humans is a bit negative, because it then distorts behavior. And I like the way he used meditation and mindfulness practices as this juxtaposition to distorted human behavior because of identifying with thoughts and feelings, where you find yourself in a situation where, let's say, without going onto some of the other principles we're going on, you were just angry, but then you also, let's say the situation made you angry, and then you were cut off earlier in that day, and that made you angry, and you're identifying as angry, and then you got cut off, so now you're angry, and you're in an experience that's made you angry. Now you're just anger, and you walk into work and blow up on somebody. And that just being an easy one-to-one understanding of how identifying with your thoughts and feelings could lead to distorted behavior. I liked his connection to more extreme problems, that this concept as a whole, with identifying your thoughts and your feelings and identifying with your mind and body, can create a prison, because then you can have thoughts and emotions, experiences that distort your behavior, or what would be something that exists outside your thoughts and your feelings. And with the moving inwards, he brings up this concept where he likes to describe an emotional experience with 3 different components. That emotional experience is mental imagery, which is your thinking about images in your mind, and then mental talk, where you're talking to yourself in your mind, and then emotion like body experiences. And we can always all think, anger is an easy one, because we all kind of know where anger feels, like anger's anger. And then this being the concept of see in, hear in, feel in. For you, what is valuable, or what are your first thoughts on these concepts?
This for me is everything when it comes to my therapy. This is the reason we teach mindfulness skills to clients in therapy, is because usually the people who come into my kind of therapy are people who are having all kinds of problems in their lives because of being caught up in over-identifying with their emotions and their thoughts. And so the whole point of teaching people mindfulness is to kind of drive that wedge between themselves and their thoughts, or themselves and their emotions, so that they can make a conscious choice. I love that you use that phrasing of I am anger or I am angry is a different thing. That is identifying with your anger as like, I am anger. I am angry. No, you're not. You are a person who is having the experience of anger. And it's like, how do we then turn inward to observe what that experience is like? And so this framework is just a really great way of explaining it, is that when you're having the experience of anger or anxiety or any other emotion that you might have, you can turn inward. And there's always going to be those three components of it that you're going to have. Now, some of them may be more or less dominant, like each of us have different systems that tend to be more strong than others, or it could be different kind of depending on what stage of an emotion's progression that we're experiencing. But you're going to have images that you're imagining in your mind. You're going to have body sensations that are associated with the emotion that you are feeling, and you're going to have inner talk, whether it is you imagining a conversation or you voicing like judgments and thoughts that you might have about it. So there's going to be thoughts, there's going to be images, and then there's going to be emotion body sensations. And that's where, if we can get folks to turn inward and observe those things, then that's where you can say like, oh, I am not this experience. These are the different components of the experience. It begins the process of helping us to de-identify from those things and begin to observe them and understand them. It's a really important part of emotion regulation, is being able to turn inward and observe those things. So for me, this part is everything. Was this the first time for you had heard it framed this way? And if so, what was your experience of it?
Yeah, so it's funny. There's my first experience was you, actually.
Okay.
I can still remember your words. You said, okay, let's unpack this. There's a couple different things going on here, and something that I had sort of stated to you. And I was just like I would say I'm pretty good just base emotional regulation, because some of the extreme experiences that I'd been in had just left me relatively tolerant to, I think, given emotions and experiences, and not over identifying. But I think in some ways that, and then some of the other philosophical stuff like Stoicism and other things that I'd found myself in over time, and extreme training methodologies. And but I think one of the things I was pretty good at was sort of compartmentalizing or escaping into like exertion-based frameworks. And so the first time you did that, it opened up a little bit of a door that I had never really thought of before. Because then after we had that conversation, I was like, that was really valuable. I think I'm gonna side quest for 1 second to just describe what I want to frame my discussion points on, in that this being an understanding of mindfulness, and then being the practice that I started to undertake being a meditative practice. And that the how for me was starting a meditation practice, and then I started to notice all these other things, where I want to almost play out a meditation practice like scenario. Let's say like 2 points of a view. Let's say we use the example with all these, and we have the scenario where, let's say, we've woken up in the morning and we didn't have a great sleep. And so you say, I didn't get enough sleep. So now you've over-identified with an experience related to your sleep. So now it's almost like, let's say we put base, let's just use easy math, that it was like 10 points of I didn't get enough sleep. And then so you wake up in the morning, you're rushing around, and maybe you catch an angle in the mirror of something you didn't particularly like. And now you're fat. Like, and sometimes these things come up really quick. And I'm gonna use this experience because it's like almost want to make like an obvious argument why sitting on the floor with your feelings is like a funny continuum that has so many benefits to it. But so you've not had enough sleep, you've identified with it, you've made a negative comment that you've sort of identified with, that you are something negative. And let's say that's 10 points. And then we play the scenario where you're on your way to work, you get cut off. So and then you get in and you blow up on somebody. And let's say now you've pictured yourself mentally in the mirror a couple times on your way to work. So you pictured that negative thing that stood out to you and you've identified with it. And now you've heard a negative voice in your head. So let's say a negative voice that was maybe given to you at some point in your life, that somebody reiterated that negative thing. Your hairline's too far up. I don't know, whatever, just some sort of thing that's been reiterated. And so then now you've seen that thing in the mirror and you're reiterating the verbiage to yourself and you're picturing it. And I just want anybody who's listening to imagine how volatile that state when you get into work is. Like, let's say you got 5 different parts to that, and they're all 10 parts. So now they're not 50 parts of this negative experience. They're, 50 times 10. You've got all these smashed up in together, and now you have become what is the center emotional experience of that trajectory. And I think what's really big here, which sort of goes back to answering the questions, how have I experienced this, is sitting on the floor. Well, I like to sit on my couch or I put yoga blocks up, but sitting on the floor with my thoughts has then now given me the power to unpack those as they're happening and existing outside of them while they're going on, and so that I can interpret them individually. And I think it's such one-on-one, you can see where this would be a better circumstance, one where all this happens at once and I've arrived at work and damn that thing, that negative ball of energy. And I make the argue that a lot of people right now are existing like this. And that's a distorted behavior to whatever trajectory of things that have gone on. And so you can have other things that have sort of played out in your tool set to help you navigate that. Like maybe you're just, you're not going to have sort of compounding things there. Like you can hear somebody say, I have road rage. Like I road rage. So you're identifying with being somebody who just gets angry when people cut off. And so now it's really easy to just get angry when people cut you off. So that might be an experience that's sort of a trigger point you. But if you identified as a calm person without road rage, you might not necessarily have that same continuum of that given event. But at any point, we can sort of make this argument that being able to concentrate and gain clarity internally is a really good skill set, because now it creates your ability to differentiate thoughts and feelings and not over-identify with them. So then now you exist as something outside those thoughts and feelings. And for me, I want to paint this sort of as like just there can be some sort of preconceived notions about what meditation is, but I want to kind of paint out what it is for me so that the listener can gain an understanding of what the sort of the actual how of the practice is for me. And then so now if meditation is for me what started out as sitting on the floor and gaining these different skill sets, is there anything else that sticks out to you for what would be concentration power or sensory clarity?
Not in particular. I think we will continue to revisit those concepts and maybe give examples as we talk about our individual practices. Like I thought you were actually going to start describing your practice there, because I think you're going to hold on to it. Okay. I think that as we do, because it's our intention to later on in the episode, we're going to talk a little bit about how it is that we practice these things and some examples of where we have practiced them in the past. I think we'll elucidate it a little bit there. You know what, though? I changed my mind. I think I have an example I want to use right now, and I think it'll help us segue into the next topic we were wanting to cover. And so I'm going to give an example of a time where I met a specific instance with concentration, clarity, and equanimity, and it really was helpful to me. So I've been practicing mindfulness for a really long time, and that's not to say that my practice is perfect or that I am some kind of guru. I'm not. I'm somebody who practices just like everybody else. But I have been doing it for a long time, and so it means that for me, because I have developed ability to do it, it means I can do it under distress. So to give you an example of what this can look like, I had an instance at work. This was, gosh, probably 10 years ago now, where I was facilitating a group, and I had a big like rolly cart of craft supplies that I was taking with me for this particular group that we were going to be doing. But the craft supply cart probably weighed somewhere between 30 and 50 pounds. And I bent over and picked it up at an awkward angle and didn't use proper lifting technique. I mean, just like, it is what it is. While I was bending over lifting this thing, I did a bad lift and my low back just let go. Like I was bent over and I could feel the muscles in my low back like let go and get pulled. And in that moment, there was a lot of pain. I was flooded with a ton of pain. But it wasn't just that. I was also flooded with a whole bunch of fear, because just 3 years earlier, I had injured my back. And as a result of that injury, a different injury that time, it was, but same low back, but it was like a twisting motion when I was injured that time. And it resulted in like 3 months of intense pain. And then it was another whole year after that before I was pain-free and could move without limitation and guarding. And so in the moment where I've now injured my back again at work, I was flooded with, I had physical pain, but then I also had a lot of inner imagery about the previous experience I'd had injuring my back. I had a lot of inner self-talk about like, oh God, what does this mean? Am I going to be up for like another year and a half of rehabilitation again? I can't go through this again. So there's all this internal self-talk. And then also the emotion, like body sensations. I had the physical pain, but I also had a lot of like fear and panic. And so I had like the tunnel vision that came, and my heart started to race, not from the pain, but because of the panic of like, oh God, what does this mean? And what was really interesting in the moment is that I'm able to describe these different components of what I experienced in that split second of what happened, because of the fact that my brain just immediately slipped into a mindful observation where I didn't identify with, oh God, my back. I noticed I was observing the phenomenon of my brain I'm feeling panic. I notice this pain. I am having these thoughts. And it was almost a surreal experience, because I had a colleague with me and I just was like, I immediately just started narrating out loud my observations of what was happening internally. And I think I freaked out my colleague a little bit, because she was just like, what is happening? She's like, I'd clearly injured myself. And I'm like, but I just kept narrating. I'm in a lot of pain. I can also feel I'm really afraid right now. I've hurt my back before. I'm not sure what this is going to mean. I think I need to go home. I need to, report this to my boss. But oh God, like, I'm really scared right now. I think I'm going to need some help. And like, it was like stream of consciousness, just saying it out loud. But all of it was about not identifying with the pain or the injury in that moment and just talking myself through it. And as a result of that, it's also a different kind of injury. But as a result of that, I was able to really calmly just like get my colleague to help me back to my desk. We were able to contact my boss. And I was able to make arrangements to like go home, get in to see my doctor, like submit the WCB stuff. But throughout that whole experience was just really having to like calm my nervous system around not attaching meaning to this experience and not identifying with it. And I was actually able to navigate it really smoothly. Like I, got back to work within a week. I immediately started rehab through a physio clinic. And so was going there a couple of times a week for 6 weeks to kind of rebuild my strength, and like I've made a full recovery. I've had no problems with my back since that time. And I've not injured myself since that time either. And I attribute part of how I walked through that acute moment of panic to the fact that I was able to drop into that really mindful clarity of the experience as it was happening. And so that's an example of like, why do we bother doing these mindfulness practices? And I think you practice because then it's in those moments of more extreme life experiences, that's where having that skill set to be able to drop into that can be super helpful. So in terms of the clarity, like what is it that I'm concentrating on, but then also how am I noticing the different components of the experience? And just in this case, I was saying it out loud, but you could also just be kind of observing it internally for yourself.
Yeah, there's so much there that was fantastic. And I think it helped me clarify. It's almost like I want to make the argument that meditation, mindfulness, whatever you're doing is just as important as physical training. Like it's part of a mental, emotional skill set that is absolutely necessary, and you will not live the highest quality life you could without it. And I think for me, I really like a lot of those things because what it is, it's like if we're describing sort of seeing in, hearing in, and feeling in, and being able to differentiate what are the different variables, it's like you're sort of just able to just presently handle the impact of the situation as it's happening. Like it's like, and then you don't have these compounding interests of all these different things distorting what would be your behavior and answer to the situation. And I really like that because it's sort of obvious on why this would be beneficial. And so I want to save sort of what my practice is for the end. That's why I kind of huddled it off there. But I think we're at a really good place where if we're describing mindfulness, and you could have a mindfulness or like a mindfulness practice, or you could have a meditation practice, and then maybe there's some preconceived notions with what meditation practice is, but I just want to, like, people can think about that the way they want to think about
Call it what you like.
Yeah, so let's just use like mindfulness for me as the broad term of what then is a whole bunch of other different trickle down things, and you could have a mindfulness practice, and so the benefits. And so describing mindfulness as a threefold attentional skill set that has concentration power, ability to concentrate in a present experience, and sensory clarity, ability to differentiate what are the variables in your experience, and equanimity. We touched a lot about what the concentration power is, what you're concentrating on, and then what is trying to gain mental clarity. Equanimity is, I think, for me, one of the more powerful principles. I've heard it defined better than how I define it, but I define equanimity as just being able to be present in an experience without over identifying or attaching to it negatively or positively. You are just present and experiencing something. You're not then, as it ends, longing for it, or let's say
trying to shun
avoiding
it,
it.
or
Yeah, yeah, like not longing for what was the positive experience, or what was sort of trying to run away, or not have that experience happen again. What is just being able to be present in life. And I think that if we're sort of describing mindfulness as this threefold attentional skill set, and then that's an ability that can be improved upon. And I think this is one of the bigger concepts that's not sort of fully for me understood here is, and there's even these limiting beliefs around training as well, but if you don't have a concentration power or good concentration, and you work on it, you can get better. Like, you're not a goldfish. ADHD, ADD, etc., psychological related frameworks, there's a lot of self-diagnosing right now because we have more information. One of the biggest limiting beliefs I've heard even describing this is people saying, oh, like, my brain doesn't work that way. Like, I can't focus. And it's like, that is absurd. And I say I can move to some sort of related things. I struggled in high school. I almost dropped out. I was school was a nightmare for me. The idea of sitting in a chair, looking at a board, like, I was live, man. I wanted to be doing things. I was all over the place. When I started studying in my first round of college, I couldn't sit there and read a textbook for 30 minutes. That felt like torture. Like that felt like unmanageable. And I bombed my first physiology test. My first year of post-secondary school basketball scholarship, well, basketball direction, I got like a 30% on my physiology test. And I couldn't believe it. I had gone to class. Like how could it's like the amount of work needed to, like, you could have different high school experiences and more engaged. I was not engaged in high school. I barely made it out alive. So when I got to university, there was this limiting belief that I was dyslexic and my brain didn't work that way. And that had been imprinted in me over time. And I felt like I was always going to struggle in school. And that was this sort of same thing. My brain doesn't work that way, so I can't improve on that given thing. And that's absurdity.
It is.
Having a limitation is not absurdity, but that just means you need to double down on that thing so that you can catch up to everybody else, or at least get closer to that, because survival of the fittest. And so if we're looking at this like a skill that can be gained, juxtaposition to that, when I got back, I wanted to challenge that negative belief when my dad died. And I started to view life a little bit differently, as I didn't have maybe as much time as I thought I did. And so maybe I didn't have time to believe I couldn't do well in school. So I wanted to go back and get my degree. I go back to post-secondary, same course, same test was going to be coming up in probably about 3 months. There'd been no education in this 2-year gap. I struggled over here, and well, this would be like a 6-year gap compared to my first physiology test, and took out that limiting belief. I started with what would be like 15 minutes and sort of just worked my way up, just being able to sit there and build on what would be a steady capacity. I got to a point where I could sit in that chair for 12 hours. I would take what I got to as like 3 hours was usually around the line where I really needed to take a break, and I could go 3 hours, little break, 3 hours. I could do that for 12 hours. Now, that was just sort of hard in, locked in. I'm not going to let anything define me. What is the development of intentional concentration power from a systematic training plan is not that. Like, this was me ramming face into a wall, like not having a limiting belief anymore. And then so if we're sort of defining that concentration power is a skill set that can be improved on, and then that sensory clarity is, and I kind of made that argument already, that obviously it would be a good skill set, and you've shown beautifully how that is something that's valuable. And then equanimity being sort of this philosophical view on life. I think there's a big point here, which is differentiating what is pain and what is suffering in relation to what is the state of equanimity. So that if we've looked at concentration power and mental clarity as a skill set that can be improved on, and then equanimity being more of this philosophical belief that can be attained related to other variables that I think we're going to touch in on. With pain and suffering, he goes into a really beautiful description of this. Is there any key takeaways for you with related to pain and suffering?
Yeah. One of them is the example that I provided, which is that that having a good mindfulness or meditation practice can be incredibly important for how we experience pain, and that we don't need to suffer. In my therapy, there is this adage that pain is inevitable. Every human being experiences pain. It is part of what it means to be alive, but we do not have to suffer. And so my injury experience is one example of how mindfulness practices can help us with that. And there's this other piece to it too, which is that often when I am, because I teach lots of people who are brand new to mindfulness, how to just do the very beginnings of how do you start a mindfulness practice. And one of the early things that comes up is that often people expect that their mindfulness or their meditation practices are going to be relaxing, or that they need to have perfect conditions to practice mindfulness. And I tell people very early on, like, you absolutely do not need relaxation to practice mindfulness, nor should it be relaxing and pleasant all the time, that there is just as much value. And I would even argue in some instances, there might be more value in mindfulness or meditation practices that explore that difference between pain and suffering. So with that, before we get into detail, I'd like to throw it back to you to kind of maybe elaborate a little bit more on that pain versus suffering continuum, and what it means to you, because you earlier you kind of alluded to it with, he does this creative thing with kind of quantifying things with math. Like, for example, if I have, 10 units of distress from this one experience, like if I woke up in the morning and I slept really poorly, I had a bunch of nightmares, and now I've got 10 units of distress from this thing. And then something else bad happens at work and it's another 10 units of distress. If I can meet each of those experiences with mindfulness, then I have 20 units. I have 10 from the morning and 10 from my work experience. I have 20 units of distress in that day. But when we don't kind of detach from it, he says it's more like multiplication. That instead I had the 10 units from the morning. Now I go into work, I have another experience that's 10 units, but they multiply one another. So instead I end up with 100 units of pain, and that he calls that suffering. So that's the difference between pain is like 10 plus 10 is 20. That's your pain. Suffering is if you go 10 times 10 is 100. You've got 100 units of suffering for 20 units of pain.
Yeah.
What would you say about it?
Yeah, it's funny. There's so much in this book.
So
I like
much.
that. I like that you used personal experience. I think I want to try to use that, because what I've gotten out of this philosophy and this practice has been quite large. I really liked how you defined the way you broke that down, and because I think if we sort of put this all together and we imagine what is concentration power, what is mental clarity, and then what is equanimity, and that I want you to be open to that your suffering is chosen, and that doesn't mean you don't experience things that are hostile to you, and that is related to pain. Suffering being, like how you brought that up, with, say, you could have pain, and you could have physical pain, and you could have emotional pain. And then if you have physical pain, and you've used the example for you that your back went out, and then you played out this different scenario. I think a lot of things for me, I think painting out my most hostile emotional scenario a little bit in some of the details over most recent times. You could have a brain injury that's lasted a year longer than you wanted to, and you're waking up in the morning and you have sort of 5 out of 10 what could be nausea, dizziness, drunk-like feelings, not being able to visually concentrate. And say, for me, that was the last year where, depending on what I did and all these different variables, X, Y, and Z, is that very often I would wake up in the morning and have this given set of symptoms to deal with. And so that, if I then start identifying with it and then sort of replaying what could be, imagine a mental image is like playing out a scenario and just imagining what it was like to not be limited by this. Immediately I play out to like a hike or a training thing, a time in my life I can imagine I wasn't limited by brain damage. And then, or I could hear voices in my head, which is maybe that you're always going to be like this. Maybe this doesn't get better. Maybe this is a forever. And it's sort of this negative chatter around what these symptoms are like. And so I wake up in the morning and maybe I didn't get enough sleep because I'm worried I didn't get enough sleep because my symptoms are worse. So then now I'm having physical pain, like a mental pain. Like I might have a bad headache. My neck pain is sometimes bad enough that it almost gives me nausea because it reaches up around my head and around my back. And so that's pain. Like, it's okay. That's pain. But then the mental chatter around it and the mental imagery, and then identifying with these different things that identifying with the feelings and the head injury, that is what then becomes suffering. So it's like that's the continuum, because now I have this, say pressure in my head, neck pain, and I'm talking to myself how maybe I'm always going to be like this, and I'm imagining times that I wasn't. Well, that's a monster. Now that's 10 plus 10 plus 10 plus 10, and then times it. So what's 40 times 10? And it's like, now that's the magnitude of the experience I'm dealing with. And then if you can unpack that, and that you have the concentration ability to go within, and you can break through those different things. So then, okay, all right, you know what? This is maybe a 3 out of 10. That's it. It's a 3 out of 10. Nothing else with that.
Yeah.
No imagining about a time that is like that a time that I didn't have these, or mental chatter around. And maybe it was there. Okay, Nate, that's unreasonable. This is not proof that you're going to be like this forever. And you still have a day today. You don't need to be imagining other times at days that were not this days and identifying with what would be better days before. And you can all just stop that all right now. And I have 40 points to be upset with. Like, I'm just like, okay, my symptoms are worse. They're like a 3 out of 10. Maybe I need to prioritize some rest today. I have neck pain. Maybe that's 2 out of 10. I have some things coming up today that are stressing me a little bit, and maybe I need to just look at that like a couple separate different things. And just one of the things he talks about with this that I'd like to touch on is the categorizing of things, the noting different thoughts and experiences, and the categorizing of it is really helpful. And then now if I take all of this, I'm dealing with some pain, but I'm not suffering. Like, I could still go into my day and be fine. Like, I could just I'm dealing with this, but it's just something I'm dealing with. And I'm not over identifying with what is the head injury as a broad concept. And I think it's an easier way to sort of paint it out this way, because without the ability to navigate all those different things, you just find yourself in a scenario where you can really distort your behavior. I'm in a Zoom call with my management team, and I'm having a panic attack, and I don't know why.
Yeah.
And that started to happen quite often. Over the last year, I've dealt with more anxiety than I ever have in my life, because it started to create this sort of reward network where I'm thinking about this experience, like it's like oh, I'm dizzy, there's pressure in my head, and then all of a sudden I get anxious. But then what the anxiousness does is it cross-references with some of the autonomic nervous system distress. So then if I'm anxious and my heart rate's ramming up, I'm going to experience a higher level of symptoms than I would be at the baseline. And now I'm sitting in this Zoom call worried about how much longer I have to look at this screen, and it's this disaster. So now this becomes suffering. I might not necessarily at this conscious point realize that I was choosing this suffering. And I think this is the differentiation, is that all that stuff is there's some pain there. Like, I'm experiencing physical pain. I'm experiencing emotional pain. Like there's pain that's going on, but it's not suffering. And I think that's the sort of point around this pain and suffering, is you can have a variety of different what would be like a bandwidth of these experiences related to small to sort of catastrophic. But the biggest point is that you're going to have to deal with something that's catastrophic at some point. For me, times where, I lost my mom, or lost my dad, or had a genetic diagnosis that distorted my behavior. There's like me moving into when my dad passed away, and I was in a show prep, and I had a shoulder injury, and it's like there's these things that, okay, the show prep was sort of an imposed goal, and then the shoulder injury was a sort of obstacle here, and then my dad dying was sort of another experience, and that I still finished that show prep. And it's like these for me, I had some experiences that allowed me to really pull the exertion lever and like the compartmentalized lever. But I would have never known how much that my dad dying of ALS would have distorted my behavior like 6 years later. And that I would then find myself where I'm sort of prioritizing novel experiences, and that I could change on a dime. I could have done anything at any moment just with some sort of perception that if I would die tomorrow, and this is literally a thought process that I found myself in that I wasn't consciously aware of, is if I die tomorrow, what is the sum experience here? And I would average that out. Okay, if I died tomorrow, would I rather be on a plane to New Zealand? Okay, cool. Let's do that. And not even talk to my partner of 8 years about it. Like, just that's how fast it would go. And just and I would make these justification points. And what I'm trying to draw out here is, if you don't have the ability to unpack some of these things, what is draw on the clarity of your internal experience and not identify with these things, maybe that's just something that continues forever. Like, it's just like, and then I'm like, okay, sure, maybe I don't make it to 60. Maybe I'm 55. Maybe it's later than that. It doesn't matter. It's like I could live my whole life like that and never have realized how the suffering that I was imposing on myself was chosen. And I think that's the biggest point there, is I could have this pain, like I could have this pain about watching my dad die of ALS and the fear of dying that way. And that is real pain. Saying that suffering is chosen isn't saying that your experiences are invalid.
Yeah.
Saying suffering is chosen is trying to differentiate between what is the pain and like labeling it as bad or good. Because in say experience of that, let's draw one step back and not say no labeling. I'm practicing equanimity in the scenario and I just existed through all that. Let's say under observation. Okay. All right. Maybe there's some irrational choices made at certain points that are not totally rational. Like, I'm not going to die tomorrow, theoretically. Like, I could, but it's like a sort
You're
of
probably not gonna.
yeah, reckless abandonment about what my choices are today and how they might affect tomorrow. Is not a good way to look at it. But under observation of that, I also have spent the last 6 years of my life living like I don't have forever. And this sort of touches on the impermanence concept we'll touch on, and I'll move into it. And I think this is a good transition between equanimity and impermanence. But if I just have this under observation, it's just that. It's like that there was situations that maybe could have distorted my behavior, but only because of the suffering I chose. But the experience of it and just being indifferent to what is the bad or in the good, maybe this was just an experience that was innately valuable to everything as a whole. Like that, just the perspective of what that experience, watching my dad die of ALS and then getting a test telling me that I have a the genetic connection, that's going to be my fate too. It's like, that's in its own a very unique experience. It's like that in its own is something that not everybody has. Like, and that gives me a very, very unique perspective in what is, maybe there's an afterlife and then there's some sort of this experience going again, and touch on some other things. But if I'm just practicing equanimity and I'm being able to differentiate between what my pain is and my suffering is, I will be innately more happy with what is my present experience.
I think in my type of therapy, we have some specific concepts that we teach that I think really help people to move out of suffering and kind of wrestle with this whole continuum of pain versus suffering, that I think could be really helpful here in terms of for the listeners at home who might be thinking like, okay, how do I get to the place where I can have equanimity about my pain so that I don't move into suffering? one of those things is this idea of willingness versus willfulness. Are you willing to have an experience, or are you feeling willful about it and rejecting the reality of what you're in? So, for example, that whole idea of wanting to reject an experience. So, for example, I imagine me having the back injury and you having your concussion symptoms. There was a part of each of us that was like, I don't want this. I don't want this. I reject this. I want it to go away. But our rejection of it, our willfulness about it, doesn't change the reality that I have injured my back and I don't have a time machine to go back and do the lift differently. And you don't have a time machine to go back and not have the head injury happen. We're in those situations. And so rejecting the reality of it doesn't change it. It just causes us suffering because we are being willful rather than willing to accept the reality that we are in. And so this idea of willingness versus willfulness, I think, is a really helpful way to think about things for people who might be listening. You can just ask yourself, if you find that you are suffering with something, to just ask, am I being willful about something that I actually don't have any control over? If you have control over it, absolutely go ahead and change it. But in the absence of a time machine, there are many things that we don't have control over. It's already happened. And so finding a way to be willing to have experiences that are painful rather than trying to avoid pain at all costs is really important. A second piece of this is it is, again, about we call these reality acceptance skills. So what are the skills for accepting reality as it is? One of them is being willing rather than willful. Another one is this idea of radical acceptance. And what does it mean to radically accept something? It means that when you notice that you have been willful and you decide, okay, I need to get willing. I need to be willing to have this injury because being willful about it is not going to make the injury go away. It's not actually going to help me recover. It's causing me to suffer with this injury instead. Then we can choose something that's called radical acceptance. And radically accepting it means I choose that I accept it all the way. I accept that I don't have control over parts of this. If there are parts of it that I do have control over, then I will continue to work my butt off to change the pieces that I do have control over. So for both of us in that case, it was we had control over participating in our rehabilitation, getting consultation from experts about what was happening with us, following through and actually doing the protocols that are prescribed for us to recover from those injuries. That's what we have control over, but we have to radically accept that it has happened. We can't undo it, that the course of recovery is going to take however long it takes, that we can only control the parts that we can control, like our sleep and, doing the recovery protocols and those sorts of things. But in terms of the course of recovery, it was going to take my back however long it was going to take, and it's going to take your brain however long it was going to take. And that we radically accept that. And it means that we may continue to struggle at times with feeling frustrated by it and disappointed by it, or have the thoughts come up, but that we just need to meet each of those with kind of that concentration and clarity so that we can then move back to equanimity of I'm radically accepting this. I accept that this is where I am. I'm not rejecting this reality anymore. And that's a really important skill.
Yeah.
I have a small practice that I would like to share with the listeners on how you can practice this in your small meditation practices so that you have the skill set when you need it in the big times. But I wanted to check in to see if you had any thoughts about what I just said about radical acceptance and that willingness versus willfulness continuum before I move on.
Yeah, like, oh God, yeah, so many. Yeah, I like the idea of putting a practice in. I think there's so much there that I really like how you tied it all in together. I really like that framework. I think it plays into so many things on how I have managed this sort of suffering versus pain continuum and the radical acceptance of it. I think I want to touch on a little bit of like just real easy physiology, where we're talking about some of the head injury is a little bit more initial for me. Watching ALS has distorted my behavior for half a decade, which is something that just recently I've started to get to the bottom of because of some of this stuff. Is that when you don't metabolize those emotions, you don't lose them. They stay, and they get ingrained into your neurological system. They become part of you. And I think one of the biggest things with a meditation practice and mindfulness in general, and where this identifying what is this the pain in whatever it's a real physical experience, an emotional experience, being able to identify it and then being able to metabolize fully that experience, that experience is fully unpacked, fully metabolized, fully had, and then that we're able to move forward effectively, is the only way you're going to be able to move forward with. Like, you could always have some distorted behavior, but it's just like training. You could have just totally obliterated your back and you could have that forever, or you could get a strong back and have less problems. And so it's like with this, it's like we could be able to identify our thoughts and our feelings, and we could metabolize them, or we could just ignore that shit and just let it just go on forever. And I like this continuum, because at the very bare minimum, if you develop these skill sets through this framework that we're creating and have a practice, you can then be able to work your way up in scenarios where, if you can just deal with a little thing like not getting enough sleep and getting cut off on your way to work, and then having some sort of minor inconvenience roll into work, and have these scenarios that you just don't even pick up on and identify with. That's a little thing. That's relatively small. Eventually everybody's going to have to deal with the big ones, and they're going to come in often, and or not as often as the little ones, and it seems life hits you in bunches. Eventually you're going to watch somebody you love die. You're going to go through some scenarios that you wish you didn't have to, and it's inevitable. And I like the description he brings up in the book, one that was quite extreme but quite cool in a lot of ways, was the scenario he brought up with this sort of military friend that gets combined with his story, and this guy reaching out to him to die better, and that he had say terminal cancer, and he didn't have lung cancer, and he didn't have much time left, and he's trying to die right. It's like, that's a funny thing. Like, what's the experience of what death is? It's like that that's some real pain that was being like felt in that story, but that he was intentionally trying to experience it. And it's a totally different framework than what is popular in our current culture, and is just like totally off it. Like, it's so far off it. Like, it's like that this is a framework where you're not even like, there's no bad or good. Like, there's like this is like that people are like, how's your day today? We're not saying it doesn't fucking matter. We're saying that it's like that you're not having a bad or good day. Like, you're just having a day, and the day is beautiful. Like, it's like that equanimity is utter presence in a scenario. It's not indifference to your life's experiences. It's presence. And I think you could look at this on a face value and sort of see maybe problems with it because of how many things you're identifying with and how many limiting beliefs you really do have. And when you can break free some of this stuff, I think it's just such a powerful framework. So I'd love for you to tell people about an easy meditation or mindfulness practice, or what you had in mind there.
Cool. The thing I was thinking of, it's so hard. I feel like I could build off what you said. And I just want to say one thing, is that I did really love, in this book, he tells a story about his friend who he has come to know, who was one of his students in learning meditation practice, and as he was dying had reached out to Shinzen for support with having a full experience of dying. And I just really love that story because of how, as you say, it's one of those things that every single human being is going to have the experience of dying. All of us will, and yet we just don't talk about it. We're mum about it. We try and avoid thinking about it. We don't want to go there. And so this idea that somebody reached out and wanted to have a full experience of what his dying was going to be like was just such a cool way to approach it, because then it helped him to honor the physical pain he was in from his cancer and the treatments and the fear that he was experiencing emotionally related to this. And at any rate, it was a very good story, and I appreciated it very much. With regard to a practice that people can do to help them maybe develop a sense of equanimity, and I think this practice will also transition us really well into our last topic from the book as well, is one where, and there's a few of them, but one where you intentionally place yourself into an awkward position. And for some people, that doesn't take much. Like I know about you, Nate, that sitting cross-legged, you need yoga blocks to support you in that position. And so for you to do this practice, all it would mean is I want you to sit on the floor cross-legged without your yoga blocks. And that will very quickly become an uncomfortable proposition for you. For others, it may mean that you need to put yourself on a chair and intentionally put yourself in kind of an awkward pose, or put your foot underneath your seat so that you're kind of cutting off some of your circulation, or that your knee is bent, not in any way that's going to injure you, but that is going to be uncomfortable. You're not looking to trigger extreme pain. You're just looking to have some discomfort. Once you get into that position, then you are going to sit there for as long as you can tolerate. I would say set a minimum for yourself of 5 minutes of intentional discomfort. And what you're going to do in that practice, the whole practice, is to pay attention to the discomfort of it. Notice how it develops. Notice how it changes. Notice what sensations are associated with it. Is it sharp? Is it achy? Does it throb? Does it tingle? Does it change? It will change over time. And then just simply observing it. Notice how there will be a part of your mind that either has thoughts or mental images about wanting to move, to relieve the discomfort, to escape from it, and intentionally choose to stay present with the discomfort instead. And then notice how your brain fights you on that and says, like, it may have judgments about, like, this is stupid. Why are we doing this? This is a terrible idea. We're probably going to hurt ourselves. We should definitely stop this. This can't be good for us. All of those kinds of thoughts will come up, and just notice them as they come. Getting familiar with how your brain wrestles with minor discomforts that are not going to hurt you in any way, shape, or form can be very helpful in terms of developing then that capacity for more fearful moments where you are injured or in pain and having to struggle with that. It can come up in more organic ways too. One of the best experiences that I ever had of it was when I was practicing a mindfulness exercise where it was a more Zen-oriented one. And in Zen meditation practices, you're not supposed to move. You're not intended to be in uncomfortable positions, but you're intended to sit in stillness and not move at all. And then I got itchy. So I'm sitting at this like Zen retreat learning how to meditate in this particular way. And I got an itch. And so you're not even allowed to like wiggle your face to try and relieve the itch. I mean, you can try and do it discreetly, but the monks will come around and hit you with a stick if they see that you're moving. Not hard. It's not abusive, but it is intended to kind of like bring you back to the present moment, to be mindful of what you're doing and to become aware of an itch and to not be able to do anything, not able, but intentionally trying not to do anything with the itch. To see then how that physical sensation, how it came out of nowhere. There's nothing causing the itch. There's not a fly on me. There's not a hair. It's just I started to have an itch and I'm not going to do anything with it, and how it intensifies. And then it becomes your whole consuming thing. All you can think about is this itch. There is nothing but the itchiness in that moment. And it feels like it's going to consume you. You cannot possibly tolerate it. And then it just, like, it's an ephemeral thing that is suddenly gone. And so if you ever are in a situation where while you are practicing mindfulness or meditation and you get itchy, even if that wasn't the goal of your mindfulness practice, I strongly encourage anybody who's listening to just not do anything with the itch, to let it be and just observe it and notice what happens. It is a fascinating experience.
Yeah, I
Go
love
ahead.
that. Yeah, it's funny because my meditation practice that I found most effective really leaned into that that principle. The because I had a right labrum tear. Maybe it was like 26. Oh God, like 8 month recovery. It was terrible. But I still have limited internal rotation on my right side. Like, say, if you're looking at my femurs, my left goes like this and my right goes like that. So when I sit in a cross-legged position, I get a lot of right groin pain. And so the my goal had been progressing the blocks, but the first couple times I did it, I just went cross-legged on the floor. And I can't really sit very upright cross-legged on the floor, so I sat up against a wall, which made it even more uncomfortable. But then after getting through this part in the book where he talks on this concept, I was like, that's the goal. I'm gonna sit here for 5 minutes in this position. And I'm not going to move. I'm not itching anything. I'm just going to sit there and I'm going to focus on respiration. And then that's what started my practice and a whole bunch of things. But it didn't take long for my groin started to bother me. It didn't really notice much in the 5 minutes. I was able to get through that pretty good. I worked my way up to sitting on the floor, to 30 minutes, on no yoga blocks, sitting on the floor with a back support. And I had it got pretty bad. It was probably I don't know, maybe I don't know what time, because I like to set a time frame, but my right groin pain started to get pretty bad. And it started to just be a little bit of an ache, and then it starts burning, and then it starts to go down into my feet a little bit. I'm feeling like pain on the outside of my feet because I also don't have very much external rotation, so my feet are just jammed into the floor. And I'm just kind of sitting there, and one of the principles he brings in is noting. You note a mental image. Like, I had a mental image there. Oh, I heard a voice there. You note it. I got pain. You note it. And you're trying to return. You're just breathing, and you get this thing, and all of a sudden you get caught into it, and then you just note it, and you try to get back. You try to get away from it. One of the things I like to do that's developed is sort of imagine myself in I'm sitting on the floor in my skull, and there's a TV on in front of me, and there's speakers. And this has actually worked really, really well. It's my sort of meditation visualization that kind of kicks me off. And so I imagine that I'm sitting on the floor in my skull. And when an image plays out, and it happens so quick, it's all of a sudden you got this work scenario, and it's like the faces, the voices, it all happens so fast. And it comes on in the TV, it's on in the audio, and I just sort of note it, and then I return back. But this point, my freaking pain was pretty bad. It's burning, it's wrapping down my leg, it's in my feet, and I'm noting it, but I'm just sitting there and focusing on respiration, and then it starts to dissipate. Okay, that was interesting, and I noted it, and it starts to dissipate, and then it was gone, and I noted it, and after that, I don't know how long it was I really got into a good flow. Once that disappeared, it's I was my respiration for a moment. It's I could just hear air getting just filled in, and it's I didn't even feel the end range when it was too much. It was just, it's going in and it's going out. And after I noted that and the pain went away, I found myself in probably what I would say is one of the better states, but not identifying it as better or worse, just maybe deeper. Like it was like that was something I hadn't experienced yet. Where because a lot of times you might be 30 minutes and I'm like, there's a lot going on in there. I'm back. It's all over the place. And I think it really touches on that was a really good practice to get a very real representation of what impermanence is now. And I think this is a good transition to impermanence, where impermanence in the English language is sort of just not anymore. Like it's like impermanent. And that's it. And I think from in this book and all the philosophies and different areas he draws on, impermanence is a much, much, much deeper experience. So with related to impermanence, is there anything that you want to hit first with the concept of impermanence?
With impermanence, I like to begin by thinking about the observation, and as he said at the beginning, this idea that it is the science of observing within. We observe the phenomena within, and by observing things, then we discover what is true about the science of enlightenment. And one of the things that we observe is that things are impermanent. The itch does not stay. The pain in your groin will not remain. Even our emotions, as I practice mindfulness as part of my therapy practice, a lot of what I am practicing for myself and with my clients is mindfulness of our emotions. And it's the same thing. Like emotional experiences also come and go like waves, right? That they won't stay around forever either. And so I love this idea of impermanence. It's not conceptually an idea that we are applying to our experience. It's actually something that comes from observation of our experience. We discover that things are impermanent, and they're impermanent there's some slight variations into impermanence and how we might describe that. But it emerges from our observation of the experience. It's not a top-down thing. It's a bottom-up discovery about how things are impermanent. What do you like about impermanence, or what resonated with you about that concept?
A lot. I really liked the impermanence as a concept of experience and not a word of description. I think that's where like there's a lot like it's like that's the Western framework. It's like science. It's like observation of a natural phenomena, sort of a research question posed, and then discovering it, the what, the how, the chemical compounds, the physics. Like it's breaking it down to its smallest minutia detail, and impermanence being the observation of nature from the inside out is the experience of it. And I think that's where sort of in outside the English language, it's where its depths come from, and it just plays into so many different things. I think it plays into the equanimity of a philosophy, because if you are constantly in this state or noting the concept of impermanence, you gain a concept in life which is utter presence. Because if you like, impermanence isn't the fear of death. Like it's like impermanence is kind of like the gift. Like it's like that the impermanence of things is bad or good, everything comes to an end. And then so the equanimity of something is experiencing it fully, not trying to avoid it or not trying to move forward to it. What is the experience? And this experience is impermanence. It's like that could be the dissipation of pain. That could be the cessation of relaxation. Like it's like it could play. There's so many little minute details that then could move into bigger, broader details of experience. Like something like death. I like what you touched upon with that. It's like we are all going to die. Nobody wants to talk about it. And it's like, I really don't, I don't agree with a cultural essence of behaving that way. I think understanding death is really important because it plays into the impermanence concept. It's like that nothing lasts for forever. And so we should fully experience everything, even if it's the pain, even if it's the pleasure. Impermanence is the noting in the experience of all things come to an end. And it's not bad or good. It's just, it is. And I think it's like even like avoiding death is sort of a weird thing. Like, and it's like this, this tattoo. It's one of my favorite tattoo, but it means a lot. It's the state of nature. The snake trying to kill the bird's fighting for its survival. And this plays into other philosophical points of mine, but it's the sort of impermanence in the state of nature. It's like I think one of the things that I sort of drew on the whole Enlightenment concept is it's returning to nature. And I think this transitions well, but it's this returning to nature, and nature is life and death, but entropy is the continued loss of energy, and the laws of thermodynamics state that energy can't be created or destroyed. It can only be transformed. So it's like you mash this science with this observe or experience phenomenon. You can put some really, really interesting things together. That it's like I don't know what the whole thing is all about here, but I know that it's survival of the fittest, but it's also the gift of life. It's like
Yeah.
the yin and yang of the bad and good. It all plays into what is our experience. And I like the note you used the analogy to me that I liked, and it was that if at the very bare minimum we're just something and we're collecting tokens of experiences, and we're trying to collect the most tokens that we can, and you can sort of as a conscious being, you can move towards tokens that you want to experience. When the far end of this is like, nah, don't even think about the tokens. Just exist. Just fucking exist. And I think what I really like about this whole concept, I think it's very freeing, because I think it's like it's this return to nature, but it's like you're also a conscious being. It's like maybe enlightenment is the utter return to nature, but you don't kind of have, they don't have to be that far. Like, it's like you don't, if there's a yin and yang to it, you can sort of try to find your way on the spectrum here. You don't, to practice meditation and impermanence and equanimity doesn't mean you have to let go of all desire. Like, it's like,
Yeah.
if you're far Buddhist practice, letting go of desire would be one of the cessations of suffering, but you don't have to go that far. And I think what I like about this whole concept is, on any note, impermanence is incredibly valuable, because just the note of the gone is that you should live life fully because it won't last forever, but you shouldn't stress about it too much because it doesn't last forever. And I think it's a really good middle line, and a good transition to a philosophical point that I think you brought up to me, that I think told me that you look at it a little bit better than I do, because one of the things he brought on, and I didn't spell it the way you spelt it either, which is Taoism, or Tao. Like, I called it, I heard D, Taoism. Okay, yeah, and returning, this philosophy about returning to the sort of fundamental powers of the universe. And it's like, didn't even know, sort of touches on my own personal philosophies. What stuck out to me a lot with this sort of transition to impermanence, but to this oneness philosophy, this returning to the one, which is sort of returning to the source, but that you're experiencing the fundamental powers of the universe. And one of them, of the sort of continuum, or two of them, is the yin and yang. It's the expansion, compression. And for me, when I'm in my meditation practice, that's the core of it. Is what helped me more than anything else in any of these practices, was sort of trying to return to respiration. Respiration is involuntary, but you have voluntary control over it. I can take a really deep breath, but if I sit here and I don't think about anything, I'm going to breathe. I could hold my breath, but I'm not going to be able to hold it till I die. I'm going to pass out and I'm going to keep breathing. So I think for me in my meditation practice, this really stuck out, this yin and yang of expansion and compression, with the impermanence note of sort of noting the gone, was a core principle to what my meditation practice is about, which is returning to respiration and noting the gone. And I think that stuck out really big for me, because if we're trying to return to the source, and the source is life, and life is breathes, and you see this expansion, compression in all aspects of the universe, down to the atoms. And I think it's a really interesting thing, because if I'm trying to return to the source, it's like, it sounds kind of cool, like, well, the source, what is the source? So the source is life. My life is respiration. That's the fundamental practice of what my body's about. So with the yin and yang stuck out really well to me with the impermanence, because it sort of gave me a concept to work on in the meditation. So that, say if we build on my practice, which is I imagine I'm in my brain and I'm sitting on the floor, is I'm sitting on the floor. When I'm doing really good, I'm not anywhere anymore. And it's almost like my meditation practice battles, it's not necessarily battles, it's all about noting, but it's that I'm on the floor and there's a TV and speakers, but the whole time I'm breathing in the middle of the floor. And I'm just, actually, this came from you. This is a huge one for mine. I really like the 5 exhalations before the starting of something. That's so good. So I take 5 huge exhalations. I get everything out of there. And then I just start trying to take the slowest, biggest breaths with the slowest, biggest expirations. And I note the start and the stop. And then that gives me sort of something that I put my awareness to. And then it's like, I'm doing that. The TV flops on, work, whatever, the voices. And then I'm like, I note it, I try to get back. And it's like this battle, and it goes back and good, but it's like, it's not, there's no good or bad to it. I'm just gonna do this for this duration of time. But something I've noted that is an interesting experience is, and see how this develops over time, but it's like really returning to the source sticks out to me, because sometimes I get so involved in my respiration that it's like all of a sudden there isn't anything else. I don't see I'm not in my brain on the floor anymore. I am respiration. That's the best way I can describe it, is I am respiration. And the yin and the yang, with expansion and compression, with the sort of note of impermanence, made a really, really big lasting impact on me on sort of a life philosophy, but really helped my meditation practice. Now you seem to have a better understanding of what that is than me. Can you introduce for me what is unique or noteworthy about returning to the source or the Tao, like that philosophy?
Absolutely. I have had the benefit of reading some books on Taoism. I don't in any way claim to be an expert, even a novice at understanding it, but I've had a couple of books, and there are some really beautiful just ways of understanding life that come from Taoism that have really resonated with me, that Shinzen does also touch on in this book. The idea of this oneness in Taoism, there's a lot of water metaphors, because there's this idea that it is all one life force and one energy. As Nate said, from thermodynamics, we know nothing can be created or destroyed. It can only be transformed. And so they will use analogies like a flowing water in a river, and how there's a saying that you can never step in the same river twice, because each time you step in the river, the water is flown on. It's a different water. It's different molecules. There's different energy or flow rates. The stones or the rocks and the mud are in slightly different places. The fish that live in the water are in different places than they were the last time you stepped in the river. So the river as an idea persists, but you would never step in the same river twice because it's always in flux and in change. And that's an analogy that's used to help us understand this idea of impermanence, that even the things that we think of as being, fixed and permanent are not. They are also constantly changing. Even you think about something we think of as being incredibly fixed, like mountains. Mountains move. They are constantly moving. And so using these observations about the impermanence of things, one of the things that Shinzen gets into is describing what are 3 types of movement that we might notice within ourselves as we sit down and observe things. So Nate mentioned expansion and compression is one of the patterns that we might notice, but there are 2 others. And so we might notice vibration type energies, and then we might also notice wave type energies. The wave one is one that I particularly resonate with because that's the one we tend to notice coming up when it comes to our emotions. Our emotions tend to move like waves, that they will begin to build and then crest and then subside. And that is a normal pattern for how things move. I also noticed that with my itchiness that day in the Zen temple, that's how it moved, is that there was a build and then it crested and then it subsided fairly quickly. So many phenomena that we can observe, especially in terms of our sensory phenomena, whether we're observing it inside ourselves, internal phenomena like an itch, or external phenomena that we observe in our world, like the waves of the ocean. Things will often move either in expansion and compression, in vibration, or in waves. And it's just interesting to think about, both in big ways, like when we think about life, right? We think about the impermanence of death, the thing that you think of as Nate or that I think of as Petrina, and that we think we are this fixed thing, will one day cease to be. We are not permanent. It will stop. Not only that, though, but there's also this thing that is Petrina, and the thing that is the experience of Nate is not the same as it was 10 years ago. You at 20 is not the same person as you were at 30. Me at 20 is a radically different person than who I am at 50. There are certain ideas we have about ourselves that we think persist over time. There's a Petrina having an experience of life, and yet there also isn't a Petrina. I think on a personal note, where I experienced this in real time, was that I had the privilege to be with my mom when she passed. And so to see and to experience it, I think that this is where we actually, I feel that in our culture, we need to be more connected with death. We have become so disconnected from death in North America. And that's not true in all cultures. I think that we need to get reconnected with that, because being present with my mom in the moment where she was there and she took her last breath, and then she was not there any longer. My mom's body was there, but the thing that was my mom was no longer there, was very impactful for me in terms of understanding then who I am is not this body. This body is very important for my experience of this life, and I want to be a good steward of this body, to have all of the experiences that I can with and through it, because we live embodied lives. And at the end, the thing that leaves is not the body. There's something else that goes, that is impermanent as well. And I like this idea of coming back to then these water analogies of that it is, you can take scoop a bucket of water out of the ocean into your sand pail, and you can take it up on the beach, and it exists as a pail of water for a little while, but eventually you're going to dump it out onto the sand, and that water is going to go back into the ocean. And so the thing that was the bucket of water is now rejoined to the ocean, and that's kind of how I see things. Shinzen doesn't get into that so much here, but for me, that's where my brain goes with this stuff.
Damn. Yeah, that's good shit. That makes me emotional too. Yeah, that's
Yeah.
heavy. That's cool. That's cool. That's I think that really like reflects. I really agree with that. That we are. It's almost like Western society is young, and I think that's the point. It's like that. Like death matters, and I think being removed from death in our food culture and then as our sort of loving culture, I think is something that's lost because you don't lose anybody without some sort of change to how you view things. And I think it just like a lot of things we've described, you can choose to grow from it or you can let it distort your behavior for a lifetime. And I've seen death that distorts people because I think of a lot of things you brought up, the willfulness versus blah. That
Willingness. Yes.
yeah, willingness versus willfulness matters. I didn't know that experience because I think it reflects for me the loss of my dad was always quite significant because I'd spent my whole life escaping the emotional horror house into exercise. Um, my my dad was diagnosed with bipolar and had bipolar episodes in his childhood, which his incidence of his bipolar episodes is much worse than say you have bipolar play out in your adulthood. My mom, they worked a lot with her schizophrenia and personality disorders, lots of things, blah blah, it doesn't matter. There was an emotional hole I was in for most of my childhood, and I'd learned to escape it with exercise, sports, whatever it was. And it's funny when I think back to early life, I think that's where my touch with nature was. I think I would leave the house, like I would go play in the park and by myself, but I'd spent my whole life escaping emotional pain with physical activity and exercise and sort of experience. And when my dad started dying of ALS, it started in his throat where they thought maybe like they didn't know what was going on. He stopped being able to talk. And so they're doing tests X, Y, and Z. But it happened in a pretty fast timeline. It didn't even last 2 years. My dad started having problems talking, and sort of like 2 months after that, he was diagnosed with ALS. And that continuum, I did my background research on ALS and my family history and was horrified. And little note that my dad had my dad's dad had 7 brothers and sisters, and every single one of them died of ALS or frontal lobe dementia. And then my grandpa died of ALS as well. My early memories of my grandpa were my dad carrying him into the house. I didn't have much experience with that side, like that grandpa, because he passed away when I was quite young. But so I had watched my dad and then lose his voice. 2 months later, impact, and 6 months after that he couldn't walk, and 6 months after that he was a skeleton in a chair, but he was still there. And I think it's sort of there's a juxtaposition to our sort of deeper notes of impermanence. Is I got to say, makes me emotional too. I got to say goodbye to my dad, which meant a lot. I still remember when I went to visit him. He had it. I saw him. He was able to walk somewhat, and not even like 2 months after that, my mom said things weren't good, and so I went to visit him, and he was confined to a chair, like couldn't move at all.
Wow.
And that night I got to express my, I don't know, the suffering of our relationship to him. And he couldn't talk back to me, but he had you could see the emotions. I got to talk, and I used it as an opportunity to sort of express everything that like I wished would have maybe played out a bit differently. And I got to say goodbye, which meant a lot, but a real strong impact of that was that I realized that I wouldn't have physical capabilities forever. Like at some point that wouldn't be something I get. Like at some point that ends. And whether it was, ALS related or just old age, like at some point our bodies end. So I think for me, the sort of far end of impermanence was sort of realizing that things aren't forever, and not just death, but it's like the worst fate you can imagine is possible. For me, I'd have these nightmares like about like losing my legs. Like it was like always like I was into extreme sports when I was younger, but I had just spent a whole lifetime escaping things and learning to love activity, just love training, love sports, love playing outside, just love it. And I always had this fear of like in maybe like unable, like it was like that was a fear of mine. And I think seeing that happen to my dad, I couldn't imagine a worse fate. I couldn't imagine one. It was like the worst thing I'd ever seen, because he was losing everything and he had to watch it. He just like he didn't lose any cognitive abilities. He didn't lose any emotions or any depth of consciousness. He was trapped inside a failing body. And that stood out to me. It really affected me quite significantly. And it's funny reflecting, because it's like this is its own journey with this type of stuff. And I never fully reflected when you brought up death within impermanence. It made me think of other deaths. Losing my mom, I didn't get the same affordances with my dad. That happened quick. And I noted the one with my dad a bit more because it contradicted some of the things I just assumed about the world. Like it's like that, that like maybe bad things don't really happen. I don't know. It's like I had a lot of bad things play out, but it's like the worst sometimes is a unique thing to look at. Like it was like my dad lost his job and then he couldn't talk and then he slowly disintegrated physically but not mentally. Like it's like that really upset me. that upset my thoughts of the universe. And it's funny sort of noting the impermanence is like I can see the positive change over time with that. Like I was never ungrateful for activity ever again. Like it's like and it even over time I can see why I gave up bodybuilding, because it was not just experiencing life through activity. And I think it's a really powerful thing, because I think even one of the things I always think is our food. We would have just saw it in a past timeline. We would have been more in touch with impermanence related to life and death. I think it's an incredibly valuable experience. It plays out to this belief in equanimity and this noting of impermanence. I just think it's a constructive way to live life and is a better way to look at things than anything else I've like sort of come across. Not a spiritual sense, not a dogma or an ideology on any given framework. It's like this is just a good way to look at the world. Like it's just yeah.
Because it gets us away from some of that fatalism or nihilism that I think we could both go to. I think you particularly was seeing how your dad was taken out and kind of what the genetic lineage of his bloodline kind of looks like and what that may or may not mean for you. For me, with my mom, like your dad, she was taking it really quickly. My mom had a very aggressive form of pancreatic cancer, and she had some vague symptoms for a long time that they couldn't figure out what was going on. By the time she got the diagnosis, it took a couple of months to get a diagnosis. By the time she had the diagnosis, between that day and the day she died was 3 weeks. So like it happened so quickly. And like your dad, she retained all her mental faculties, but physically, the disease process, it was a very aggressive form of pancreatic cancer. And so she died very quickly at only 71 years old. And so mine is slightly different from yours, but like you, there's also this, for a while for me, there was this fatalistic quality of like, holy shit, maybe I don't have the timeline I thought I did. And that when you are not mindful and observing all of like the thoughts and the mental imagery and the emotion-based body sensations that come up with that experience, it can distort your behavior and even your way of seeing for a while. Whereas as I have leaned more into embracing impermanence, and here's the thing, I will always be grateful for the experience that I had with being with my mom through her dying, because of how it changed me. The emotions distorted things for me for a little while, but I will always be so grateful for that experience, because the experience of grieving and grief that I have afterwards, I stayed very present. I never ran from the grief, and had good support with that. And because of that, grief has been one of the greatest blessings in my life in terms of teaching me things, opening me up, helping me to understand myself, helping me love better and be more present with people. I'll always be so grateful for that. And over time, what happened, I think I had this initial reaction, and then I really just got very familiar with grief and embraced and leaned into that, and have now come to this place where I'm okay with the impermanence of things and can meet with more equanimity this idea of like, if I get to live until my late 80s like my father has, then great for me, and that will be its own journey. But if I also, die suddenly and abruptly the way my mom did, that's okay too. Those are both valid life journeys, and I don't need to fear either of them, because I also don't have control over which path I get to take. I love how you talk sometimes about this idea of like, we do have control over some of our genetic destiny in terms of choosing lifestyle factors to kind of maximize the genetic potential each of us carries within ourselves. And at the same time, there's parts of life around impermanence that it's the roll of the dice, and that you need to, like the gentleman that Shinzen described in the book, meet your own death experience with curiosity and openness, and just have a full experience of it, rather than avoiding it, perhaps. I don't know.
Yeah, it's funny. This one, just like I knew this was gonna get philosophical, because it's just like oh man, like philosophical is what it's all about. Like, it's like the way we look at things matters, but it's like it's all about curiosity, and the just it could just distort your behavior so significantly to run, avoid, over identify, be incoherent. And I think this like framework of a skill set, with some big notes on broader belief systems, are something that's made a really massive impact on me, because I think it's like, in a lot of ways, this was just the like almost the only way I was going to escape some of the distorted behavior that ALS played out without. It's like not even, it's like you can, sometimes you're aware of it, but you don't fully see it. And it's funny you talk there. It's like this was big in sort of the yin and yang with what grief and loss taught me. With my dad, a lot of times I've talked about the yin and yang. It's like my dad, I learned to like sort of believe, I learned that nothing lasts forever, and you can lose everything you ever thought you weren't going to lose. And it's like you could have the worst play out, but then that taught me that you don't maybe have as much time as you think, so you should really spend your life trying to move in the direction that you want, and everything else is sort of irrelevant. And then that sort of went on a quest of academia and bodybuilding, and played out to some things that were positive, and some things that were distorted maybe. But when I lost my mom, I was like, damn, saw my mom twice in the last 3 years. And it's like, the fuck is that? And I made a choice that, and I brought this up before, but I made a choice that I wasn't going to go see her because the gym shut down and I was on a cycle and I didn't want to lose gains. Like, it's like the quest to go as far as I could possibly go made me miss all the little things that are maybe the whole point. And so when I lost my mom, I learned that there's more to life than an outcome. There's more to life than a destination that you're pursuing. And you get too distorted on chasing something that you miss what you have. And that was a big yin and yang for me that opened up a world that I would have never seen. And then a lot of ways where this information intersected with me was then in how the genetic information distorted me. And it's almost like that was an obstacle I didn't really fully know how to handle. And it was the only thing in my life I ever avoided in a lot of ways. I think it's like, when I think back to, it's like I think avoiding made me think of it. This distorted behavior concept stands out to me and brings clarity to some things, because I can see when I lost my dad, it distorted in one way, but was much more metabolized. And then when I lost my mom, it was distorted in one way, but more metabolized than what the dad one. But then the ALS thing continued unmetabolized under all the experiences. And then the genetic, it's like I avoided that one. Like, it's like that one was too much. Like, it's like watching my dad die or losing my mom. That's okay. Like a tombstone that says you have to die the way your dad died, that fucked me up. Like, that was just like, I didn't even want to look at that. And I think it sort of went sort of avoided over time. And then it distorted things to a point that I was really wanting to figure out why I was behaving in certain ways. And I think then this skill set and belief system is the only way I would have ever been able to start to get out of that. Because I think the sort of not wanting to accept it, the fear of it versus the acceptance of it, made a bigger impact than anything else could have made. And I think the whole framework of related to attentional skill set, concentration power, or sensory clarity, concentration power, and equanimity as an attentional skill set to be developed on, with related to some of these bigger principles like pain versus suffering and impermanence, is just something that I can't imagine not having this information now, and the effect it's already had on me and over time. It's really big. Yeah.
So on that note, then, let's bring it full circle, because we have gone to a very philosophical place, and I think we want to bring it back to a grounded place, because when you and I started talking about this book, I think one of the things we both appreciated from it was how Shinzen, he gives so much information in terms of like the history and the intellectual concepts and the philosophy. But what both of us most appreciated that he also gives you some really practical and pragmatic tools for like, how do you actually do this? So that we walked away from this book knowing, if you are somebody who wants to practice mindfulness, how do you actually do that? What are you going to be doing? So maybe you and I can talk a little bit about what our mindfulness practices look like these days, like so that we can give some examples for our listeners, and then we'll wrap things up.
I love that. I imagine it's a pretty good transition. Let's sort of talk about mine, and I'll ask you about yours. I've kind of alighted on the practice. For me, my practice involves something about the how was big for me, and I started at the beginning. It's like I'd heard the what of meditation for years. This was the only how I ever got, and it made a lot of sense, and I enlightened on it before with the sort of visual experience. So if we look at mindfulness as the skill set that composes of concentration power, sensitivity, clarity, and equanimity. And we imagine that there's some basic components there. Concentration being what are we observing, and they say the attention span or the ability, and then what we're focusing on. And with the three components of an emotional spirit experience, kind of looking in, being mental imagery, mental talk, and emotional like body sensations that we can sort of see in, hear in, and feel in. That creates the framework with related to then impermanence for me and yin and yang for expansion and compression. And I kind of enlightened on that. So my how is I like to sit on the floor or on the couch, whatever, cross-legged, with my back supported. My goal is to develop my flexibility a little bit and be able to sit on the floor, like just on the floor. I think that just sort of, for me, it's like a developing skill set in a positional context that really works well with my brain and training under like skill sets. And so right now I started at five, like, man, the first timer I ever set was 3 minutes. I think I went 3, 5, 10, 15, 20, 25, 30, and still the longest one I've ever done is 35. And I've now put that on a continuum of what is long and short. And so then this plays into this framework of everything I've gotten here is usually my shorts, if we're deciding yin and yang from relaxation and sort of training, like this is what I imagine, like, okay, I'm gaining back to heart rate, like I'm gaining back to rest, or I'm exploring. Exploring is sort of the training, and the rest being sort of actually trying to rest for my brain. Now I have short and long. So for me, long is like over 20 minutes and I'm trying to get longer. Short is usually 10 to 15, like 5 to 15. Even I've found a benefit of 4 minutes. I had 4 minutes, set a timer on the floor in my office at work. For me, it started in a really calm environment where I put earphones in, or like earplugs in, and I sat in a quiet space. And now I've developed to being able to do it, say, at work in my office. So the how is, so I'm now sitting on the floor. I like to set a timer because most of the times, maybe at some point I could get to some open sitting on the floor for 3 hours. I'm not there now. So I set a timer because it confines what I have at that current point. And so I like to set a timer so then it organizes what I'm trying to do for how long. And so then now I sit on the floor and I set I'm sitting cross-legged. That's what matters. I set a timer, and depending on what I have available. So if I have 5 minutes, I'm going to do 5 minutes rather than 5 minutes of scrolling to avoid my feelings instead of looking at them. And I do it anywhere. I'll do it at work. I'll do it anywhere now. And so I confine the time. I set the timer. This is how long we're going for. And then what I do is I do 5 huge exhales. I want to get out as much oxygen as possible because I find when I can take deeper breaths, I feel a bit better. I usually don't differentiate if I'm trying to rest or explore. Most of the time, open-ended. Do I need to explore or do I need to rest? And I find out with where my brain goes. So I do my 5 exhales. When I start inhaling, I imagine I'm in my brain on the floor, TV, speakers. So I play out this visualization because for me, it starts to play in because I'm sitting on the floor. My my exhalations are my sort of physical like sensations. I'm noting my physical sensations. And then when I imagine in my brain, I'm creating sort of like the playing field for what is see in, hear in. So I can see in, and now I can hear in, and I'm there. Okay. And then now what I do is I just focus on breathing, not forcefully, just slow and relaxed in, just as long as I can. No hold, out. And I just go in and out. And then usually I can tell what I need. it's like if I'm real worked up at work, that breath isn't very long. Like it's like it does not feel like I can take a deep breath. If I'm at home and the lights are off, usually that's quite a bit bigger breath. And then when I go from there, my intent is kind of sort of just to be aware of what I'm feeling, emotional, like body sensations, what I'm hearing inside my head, and what I'm seeing. And I sort of note things. I'm like, okay, this crucial conversation at work where somebody got elevated. Oh, that's interesting. Like, I'm still thinking about that. Okay, back to respiration. I'm still focusing on it, but it's like you can almost feel like your brain gets so far away from it that almost you don't even know you're breathing anymore, and you're in that scenario. So I try to note that and then return. And so I'm in the scenario and then I'm back, and then I'm breathing and I'm in a scenario. And it's sort of this game where I'm just like, I sort of just try to get back to respiration, and I note the things as I'm going. I can tell where I need a bit more exploration if it's all over the place. Like it just, or there's like a focal situation that keeps coming back to, or I can tell where it's like I don't note if I feel it's good or bad, or I'm getting deeper or not. But there has been, when I get into just the respiration, that's something different. That's maybe the deepest I've gone yet. And you can do your own exploration, but that's like when I get to that, like I'm deeper, I'm deeper to something, and then all of a sudden it's all gone. Like it's like I don't hear, I don't see. It's respiration, and it's like it's a weird feeling. It's like I'm a vacuum. Like I don't know, it's weird. The and then it's just for that time, I just do that. I just keep doing it, and I've noticed from that practice, I'll sort of touch on two things. Is my symptoms are relatively usually between a 3 and 1 now on my head injury continuum. After a meditation, I'm a 0 for a little bit after. So that's now I am at a higher frequency where I try to do 3 of them a day, but varying between 1 and like short and long, with long being 30 minutes and short being 5 or 10. And I'll just try to do it whenever. I just like whenever I can. I like a real intentional one if I can once a day, where I'm in a dark space with headphones in. That's more my exploratory one. I usually do that before bed or after work. And then the ones I do at work or in the morning are usually quick, even if it's 5 minutes. And it's just this game. I do that for the time. I've noticed the relaxation side is related to my autonomic nervous system distress. When my symptoms are lower, and then when I work out, my heart rate stays lower, which is interesting. Real physiological effects to what this meditation bout did, which is sort of, for me, it's like an instant gain. That's the sort of relaxation part. But I noticed over time, it started at Christmas. My practice got better. So I've been doing it now 3 months. Maybe like a month and a half ago, I've noticed a 1-in-1 difference between certain scenarios on my ability to exist outside myself. Like not thinking about it. I'm not thinking about it. Like I'm just meditating, once to 3 times a day. And I find myself in this scenario, and I'm almost like, oh, you're really mad. You did not like that comment. You're almost feeling violent. Like, that's interesting. You should note that. You should maybe leave this. Okay, note that. Leave this. Don't make a choice till tomorrow. You should probably sleep on that one. Just leave it. Go back to work. And it's like there's this, I've noticed it's almost like this, I'm more able to be outside of an experience, not like I'm looking at myself. It's just almost like I can pick up on it really fast. And it's like you verbalizing with your injury, you're verbalizing what's happened. Now I've noticed, like, inside my head, I'm much better at picking up on these emotions, these thoughts, these feelings. And I even had one that and then I'll go to your practice. Because I think for me, the how matters. I hope that one person gets through this and they start a practice. I had an interaction with somebody about the ALS thing. And I won't necessarily go into the continuum of that. But there's this same scenario that's happened maybe 4 times. The first time it happened, I said I'd never tell anybody about what I said ever again. The second time, I don't like this, but I don't clearly understand just why just yet. And then the third time, it's almost like I was understood a little bit more, but I was less reactory. I mattered. But I never really was able to figure out why. And then in this timeline, since I've started this practice, it happened again, but the context of it really elevated me. But I was able to unpack it pretty fast in probably a day, when I never was able to unpack it years prior. And I was able to identify why I felt that way, what I felt like was the sort of right and wrong, and how I should address the scenario. And then I made a plan to talk to the person about it, because it did play out into a work scenario, like it mattered, and there was a behavior that needed to be addressed. I wanted to draw that out because the whole continuum of this is what's made it real for me. Like that almost just like understanding a training plan. And well, you don't just need to know the sets and reps and the exercises. You also need to know how to do the sets, the reps, and the exercises, and what intensity and how long to rest. And there's a bunch of things. And this continuum was the only framework that ever gave me the tools to put in a real practice. And that's exactly what my practice looks like and is the intent. And those are some of the benefits I've got from my given practice right now, and a little bit of the timeline. For you, your practice, what does it look like? And maybe just sort of whatever comes to mind with your practice.
Yeah, I'll share mine in a moment. I would actually like to ask you some questions just to summarize for the listeners, to make sure I'm really clear, because I think you have provided a really fantastic example. So it sounds like you are practicing mindfulness every single day. You are practicing at least 2 times a day, but you'll sometimes add a third practice as well, depending on what's going on in the day. And if you notice, say, symptoms, or you notice emotions, thoughts that are coming up that are bothering you, that you need maybe another self-check-in. So you're using these really regularly as self-check-ins, kind of one during the day at work that'll be like 10 minutes, and then usually another one that's about a half an hour at home, but that you built it up over time in terms of how long you were able to sit and do it for. The practice looks the same in both instances. It's just you sit on the floor, you focus on your breath. You start with the 5 strong exhales, and then just kind of try and settle in, focus on your breath, and have that visualization of the audio and the TV for any of the mental images. And then you didn't talk a ton about checking with body sensations. I'm not sure how much that's necessarily a part of what you're doing, but it sounds like you're pretty consistent with your practice. It's every single day, twice a day.
Yeah, exactly. My body sensations get addressed pretty well in training. I've noticed that's like something that's like, I'm so aware of what's going on physically that it's almost like the gap was mentally, emotionally. So my practice really evolves around that. I will note things that play into something that maybe needs to be addressed in training. Say for me, it relates to my neck pain. I might be sitting there and I'm like, oh my God, that's tight. Like even sitting here, like that is tight. I got to do some of my neck stuff later. And that's usually kind of how it plays out physically. Yeah.
Very cool. I love the consistency about what you do, Nate, because in terms of like what I am usually teaching others or preaching to others maybe to do, is that it is about the consistency. It's not about how long you can sit for. Everyone will need to build up a tolerance for it over time. And for some people, even starting with 2 minutes is really tough at first. And so there's kind of a hardiness that you need to build up over time, but it is the consistency that enables you to do that, which is really cool. My own practice has evolved so much over time. Like I said, I've been practicing mindfulness since I was a teenager in some capacity, and it's morphed and looked like a lot of different things. And then when it became it was part of my life long before it was a part of my professional life. The part of why I chose the type of therapy that I got training in and do is because of how core mindfulness was to it, because it was just so core to my own life. When I was an active part of so the therapy is called dialectical behavior therapy, or DBT. And DBT is practiced as part of a treatment team. So as an individual therapist, you don't do it. You do it as part of like a team. And one of the foundations of that is that then we do it every single time we do a skills group lesson with our participants. We start with a mindfulness practice. We do it every single time we're doing training with other staff members. We have multiple mindfulness practices as a part of it because it's so core to the therapy. I'm often doing it in my individual therapy sessions with clients, and every single team meeting that we would have about the therapy or kind of any kind of consultation, we would begin as a team with these mindfulness practices at work. And so often those are really short. They're 2 to 5 minutes long. But just having it be such an embedded and persistent and a repetitive part of my day, ingrained it in a way that makes it now so automatic for me. I'm so grateful for that. However, I'm no longer part of a DBT treatment team, so I've had to be a little bit more intentional about what it looks like in my life these days. I have, maybe over time, I'll share other past examples of what it's looked like. I'll just talk about what it looks like today. The primary thing that I do is very similar to your own, where I do 5 minutes every single day. I have other meditative practices that I do other than just straight mindfulness practices that are more kind of like active and reflective. But before I begin those practices, and I do them every single morning, I usually sit, I have a reading chair that I like to sit in, and I will go make myself a cup of coffee. I will have like a sip of coffee, and then I will sit and I will do 5 minutes of mindful practice. And I will set a timer on my phone, and I just kind of sit in an upright but relaxed posture, and I close my eyes. And for that 5 minutes, I start with 2 strong exhales to kind of really blow the air out of my breath or out of my lungs, and then settle into whatever a natural slow rhythm of breathing is. If I'm particularly stressed, then I try and be mindful about having my exhales, the count of my exhales is longer than the count of my inhales. So it's like if I'm breathing in for 4, I'm breathing out for 8 kind of thing. I really try and draw out that out breath, because when I'm under stress, I have a tendency to hold air in my lungs. So that's what I do. And I find that very helpful. And then in terms of what I'm actually like doing during that 5 minutes, I really love counting my breaths. What I love about counting breaths is that for me, rather than paying attention to the body sensation of breathing, for me, I count in 1 and then out 1 and then in 2 and out 2. And where it is a really helpful check for me is that if my brain is distracted, I will lose count. And the rule that I have is that if I lose count, I have to start over at 1. It's not about a goal of getting to a particular number or seeing how slowly I can breathe. It's simply a way of keeping track of whether or not my brain has gotten distracted. Because then if my brain starts thinking about something else, then it'll be like, shit, what number was I on? And so rather than having the thought of shit, what number, I just know, like, if I'm not 100% sure what number I'm on, I know I just restart at 1. It's a way for me of kind of keeping track of when my mind has wandered off. And what I try and do is to not attach too much to those thoughts. Like, I don't beat myself up for it. I just notice, like, oh, I got caught up in thinking about something I have to do later today. Come back to your breath and just go back to 1 and 2. And so then at the end of it, because then I do start with a mindfulness practice, and then after the 5 minutes, I then go into a more active, this is where I do more of my reflective journaling. And so if there were things that were really bothering my mind or trying to interfere with my ability to concentrate and stay present, then I will process those through my active journaling. And then if there wasn't something that was kind of came up during my mindfulness practice, then my active journaling focuses on other reflective practices. But that's kind of what it looks like for me. So I do it every single day at the start of the day. And then I'll also build it in other ways. So anytime I am under stress, if I am experiencing like intense emotions for things, I have learned that I am much better served to give myself a moment. And as you noticed for yourself, sometimes it's about noticing it's happening in the moment and making a conscious choice to not say or do anything with that emotion in the moment where you're having it, because you don't want it to distort your behavior. You want to choose what's effective in the moment. But the difference is that I'm not compartmentalizing it either in terms of just like, oh, I'm just going to stuff that inside a jar and just put the jar in a closet and never to be looked at again. It's more just like I'm putting it aside for this moment to stay present with the moment that I'm in. And then I can go and process, reflect on. I had a big emotional reaction in that situation. What was that about? What was I reacting to? Was it something the person said, or was it that what the person said reminded me of something else? What was happening for me in that moment? It gives you a little bit better control over your choice to be reactive in your emotions in the moment versus being able to validate your own emotions. That the emotion came up for a reason. They're always valid. And it may not be valid to act on the emotions in that moment. So you behave in ways that are effective in the moment, and then you get a chance to reflect on and look at those emotions after the fact to kind of better understand yourself and your own patterns. It's one of the things I really love with mindfulness practice is about, as you notice, what are the things that come up? It's not just about noticing, say, oh, I'm really distracted because I'm stressed about a presentation I have to give on Wednesday, for example. But instead, when you do it every single day and then you notice, hey, I've noticed this theme that of all the work stressors I have to deal with, doing these types of presentations really seems to distract my brain. I wonder what that's about. You start noticing your own patterns and the themes that kind of cut across different sessions. So it's, you learn your own psyche a little bit through noticing the patterns that happen across time.
I really love all that. You can really see the intuitive practice. You've obviously been doing this a lot longer, so your practice is very foundational, but it's a bit intuitive based on your own psychology and things you've noticed and what is the best tool for you, which I really like because it plays into mindfulness as training, just like the training parable. It's like when you start, you need a pretty good plan, and you need to put it at the right frequency, and intuitively doesn't work. Like you can't sit there and like you need a practice, and then after you do the practice, you start learning a lot about the practice, and then now it plays out. So what I liked about your practice is it played into your own sort of obstacles with observing the internal environment. And I like the counting because it's almost like it's a very cerebral in this framework that came up at work on sort of communication things. I reckon you're a blue. Because it's like
I'm a blue.
Have you done the color code?
Yeah, I have.
Yeah, I knew it. Because it's like the tool there, which is it's very purposeful to what is the best lever for you. When my tool is all like the breathing is very ingrained in my in-tuned body connections. So I'm all the years of training and practices physically in sports and training and other principles made me very in tune with my body. So it's like my practice involves something that gets back to the physical, which I really like. And I liked your practice because it makes me think of like Marcus Aurelius's meditations. I like the journaling as a meditation. Journaling is one that isn't as established as what I'm doing right now, but is one that I think is so beneficial. Having this conversation with yourself and putting it back into the sort of physical, the real world, and then being able to see it. Journaling as a meditation practice, I think, is a really maybe a mindfulness practice, meditation, however you view it, I think is a really good one. And I like your practices.
I think one last one I want to mention, not because it would be a daily practice, but because I think it can have really profound impacts and give people a taste of what some of the deeper mindfulness practices can be like, that you can, if you have this experience, that you can come back and do the smaller exercises, and you'll know what it is you're trying to connect to, is going into a float tank, going into a sensory deprivation float tank, and I am looking at you, Nate, because I have talked to you about this before and I want you to go do it. So if anybody listening to this podcast knows Nate, maybe reach out to him and just ask him, hey, have you tried that float tank yet? Because I would love for you to have that experience. So for the listeners at home, they are large cabins that you float in water that is body temperature and filled with magnesium or Epsom salts. And so you float. And so while you're in there, they're completely dark. All the sound is baffled. There is no light that gets in or out of it. You are floating in water that is body temperature and is so buoyant with Epsom salts that you don't even have a sense of gravity. And you lose sense of where you are in time and space while you are floating in one of these tanks. And to go in there and then meditate and get into your Zen practice while you are losing track of where you even are in, like, what am space, what am time, what am body, is a really, really cool experience. And so going in there, it can be tough to do it mindfully for the whole time, because usually floats are like you're in the tank for 60 minutes. So it's like it's a longer experience, and you can go longer than that too. The longest one I've done is 90 minutes, which is intense. And at the same time, I have had some tremendously profound experiences doing that. And so I think it can be a great way to just like jump into the deep end, see what that feels like. And then you'll know what is that sense of loss of a sense of self that you are trying to achieve in your deepest mindfulness practices. So.
Yeah, I loved. It's funny that when that first came up to now, it's like I really want to do that, because it's like now sensory deprivation didn't mean it, like as much as it would mean now, because now it's like the not having any mindfulness or meditation practices, returning that, like those levers wouldn't have made as much sense as they make now. So then now it's like, ooh, yeah, it's like, okay, let's totally turn off sensory awareness and see where we go. But then also having the foundation of my practice now, I know how to work on just even trying to get back to that at work. Like I'm like in my office with the light off and people are knocking on it and stuff. So going to something that's now the opposite, not a stressful environment, now the farthest calm environment that could be displayed. So that'll be high up on the agenda. Because even I was thinking now I'll be moving to Calgary, I think what'll be cool is I might be able to maybe some experiments with the brain and the other emotional benefits, but like do that and see how I feel, and recovery modality maybe, I don't know. But yeah, definitely. I will look into that now.
I'll say when you do, because I think it's just a matter of time of when, but you will eventually. So when you do, let's plan to come back and we'll have another episode just about just debriefing what your experience was. And then I can compare and contrast that with some of what my experience has been, and what there's actually some interesting, like, I don't know, there's probably research, but there's certainly lots of like anecdotal reports of what people typically describe their experiences in the float tanks are like. I think that could be a cool episode.
Yeah, dive deep on what is the middle ground phenomena that could be experienced in something like that. And I think for our listeners, we already have an episode for implementing a mindfulness practice, and we'll also be releasing a stage 2 for that to help you get deeper and gain your concentration power, emotional clarity, and experience a state of equanimity.
Absolutely. Thank you for the plug on that. That episode, we'll be releasing it in tandem with this one. So maybe we'll release this episode, and then a week after this one releases, we'll put out the next mindfulness one. The mindfulness, the next mindfulness practice is simply my own mindfulness practice, which is we're going to set a timer and sit in silence for 5 minutes. I will do some preamble to help you get set up with that. And then there's a debrief afterwards, just another short one.
Love that. So as we've come to a deep dive on what is the Science of Enlightenment, tools to get closer, is there anything that kind of stands out to you that you'd like to close on?
This was a really great book. I got the audiobook. I have listened to it more than once. I think there's 2 different versions of the audiobook out. This is the one that is narrated by Eduardo Ballerini. That's the narrator on it. He is excellent. And I have listened to this book more than once because there's just so much in this book. I mean, Nate and I have been talking about it for 2.5 hours, and we have barely scratched the surface of just how much is packed into this. I could go on and on about it. This book is great for people who are entry level to mindfulness and needing to know what are some of how do I actually do this? And what am I looking for? Like when I'm sitting there doing the meditation thing, what is it that I'm supposed to be doing? What am I trying to observe or look for? He does a wonderful job of that, but he's also got lots of information in there for people who are interested in some of the history or the cultural diversity in different mindfulness practices, or who want to understand some of the neuroscience or research on these practices, and also for people who are more advanced in their mindfulness practice and who maybe have reached a stage where they have gotten a high level of concentration capacity and clarity, and are working on what are some of the almost master level things that can come from in terms of insights about self and life and the universe that can come from mindfulness practice. He goes into that deep end as well. Nate and I haven't really even touched on those aspects in the book. I think anybody who is interested in mindfulness would benefit from listening to this book. And like you, I do agree that mindfulness for me is one of those practices that, just like getting your steps every day and drinking enough water and sleeping, kind of a 5-minute mindfulness practice is the bare minimum of what we need to be doing for kind of the hygiene of cultivating our own concentration, clarity, and equanimity. How about you?
I agree.
What do you think about this book? Final thoughts, and who would you recommend it for?
Yeah. I think that you take everything you've ever known about mindfulness and meditation, and you come into this book with an open mind. And you get a lot out of it, no matter what. I think it is a fundamental understanding for a human being. I think anybody could benefit from it, but I think you have to come into it with an open mind and a set of what you'd like to achieve from it. I think anybody could benefit from it, but I think if you come in with an open mind and you're exploring for deeper senses of self, I can't get enough of this book. And I agree with you. We could talk about this all day long, and there's a lot of different directions.
Mm-hmm. This might be one we need to revisit again in the future. I've read it multiple times. You've already read it multiple times since I put it on your radar. And so we may come back to this one again. I would suggest maybe if the listeners have any comments or questions, if they end up reading this book and have thoughts about it, please reach out to Nate and I to let us know what you think, because again, we would be very interested to have more conversations about this book and all there is to chew on from it. There's lots of good meat on these bones. Okay. Well, thanks for the conversation today. I really appreciate your time, Nate. And how can the good creatures of this world find you on the internet?
Yes. Thank you, Petrina, for the fantastic conversation. The good creatures can find me on Nate Bolding on a couple different platforms, which is Instagram, Facebook, and TikTok. And you can also find the creatures we become on Instagram and TikTok as well. And how can the good creatures find you?
You can find me online at Petrina Calder. I am on TikTok, Instagram, and we post the podcast to YouTube, Spotify, and Apple Podcasts.